How much is Africa losing to gold smuggling? And who's really benefiting? Gold, a symbol of wealth and power, has been at the heart of African economies for centuries. Yet, as the continent grapples with poverty and underdevelopment, a staggering amount of its most precious resource is being siphoned away through illicit channels. The recent Swissed report, which reveals that the United Arab Emirates, UAE, receives most of Africa's smuggled gold, poses a critical question. How much is Africa really losing to gold smuggling, and who stands to benefit the most from this illicit trade? Let's find out.
Now let's talk about a study on gold smuggling from Africa. It was released earlier today. It says that in 2022, at least 435 tons of gold were smuggled out of Africa. 435 tons. That's more than 1 ton of gold every day. Do you know how much 435 tons of gold are worth? About $31 billion at today's rates. It's enough to wipe out the national debt of some of these African countries, but that much gold was illegally smuggled out of the continent in 2022.
According to Swissed, between 2012 and 2022, over 2,500 tons of smuggled gold, valued at an astonishing $115 billion, found its way into the UAE. This figure represents the enormous scale of the problem, with nearly 80% of Africa's annual artisanal gold production going unreported and smuggled out of the continent. In 2022 alone, around $31 billion worth of gold was illicitly taken from Africa, landing in markets far removed from the poverty-stricken regions where it was mined. The economic impact on African nations is devastating. Countries like Sudan, Mali, and Zimbabwe, which are rich in gold, are seeing their wealth drained away, contributing to a cycle of poverty, conflict, and instability. In Sudan, for instance, the gold smuggling trade is intricately linked to ongoing conflicts, with various factions, including the UAE-backed militia leader Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, Hemeti, profiting from the chaos. The situation is no different in Zimbabwe, where smuggling networks reportedly cost the country up to $100 million every month. This massive loss of revenue could have been used to build infrastructure, improve education and healthcare, and reduce poverty. Instead, it fuels corruption, empowers warlords, and perpetuates conflict. The illicit gold trade strips African nations of the very resources they need to escape the clutches of poverty and underdevelopment. If you're finding this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on more critical discussions like this. Your engagement helps us bring you the content that matters most. The UAE, particularly Dubai, has positioned itself as a global hub for gold trading. Dubbed the City of Gold, Dubai's thriving gold market is, in many ways, built on the backs of African miners who see little to none of the profits from their labor. The lenient global system that traces the origin of gold to the country where it enters the international market, rather than the source country, allows the UAE to legally import smuggled gold without facing significant scrutiny. The UAE's role in this trade is not just passive, it is active and complicit. Despite changes in official legislation in 2018 and 2022 aimed at cracking down on money laundering and illegal trade, the flow of smuggled gold into the UAE has not abated. On the contrary, it seems to have intensified, with gold imports to the UAE increasing by 50% in just 1 year. This raises uncomfortable questions about the true intentions behind the UAE's gold trade policies. Is the UAE merely a beneficiary of an existing system, or is it actively exploiting legal loopholes to profit from Africa's wealth? The Swissed report suggests the latter, highlighting the UAE's deficiencies that make it vulnerable to money laundering networks. While the UAE is the primary beneficiary of Africa's smuggled gold, the role of Western nations cannot be ignored. Switzerland and India, both major players in the global gold market, are also implicated in the report. These countries, like the UAE, are accused of taking advantage of Africa's weak regulatory systems to import illicit gold. The West's involvement goes beyond mere participation in the trade. There is a long history of Western powers turning a blind eye to the exploitation of Africa's resources. From the colonial era to the present day, Western nations have consistently prioritized their economic interests over the welfare of African nations. The current gold smuggling crisis is just the latest manifestation of this dynamic. Moreover, the global financial system, which is largely shaped by Western powers, facilitates the illicit gold trade. The lax regulations and legal loopholes that allow gold to be traced to the country of import rather than origin are not accidental. They are the result of deliberate policy choices made by powerful countries that benefit from the status quo. The illicit gold trade has broader implications for Africa beyond the immediate loss of revenue. It undermines the rule of law, weakens state institutions, and perpetuates conflict. In countries like Sudan and the Congo, the smuggling of gold and other resources is directly linked to ongoing violence and instability. Warlords and militia groups, funded by the proceeds of illicit trade, continue to wage war, displacing millions of people and creating humanitarian crises. The smuggling networks also contribute to the environmental degradation of African landscapes. Artisanal mining, which is often illegal and unregulated, results in deforestation, soil erosion, and water pollution. The environmental costs of this trade are borne by local communities who are left with barren lands and poisoned water sources long after the gold has been extracted. Furthermore, the illicit trade undermines legitimate businesses and investors. African nations that rely on gold exports struggle to attract honest investors when their markets are flooded with smuggled gold. This creates a vicious cycle where legitimate economic activities are stifled and illegal trade flourishes. The Swissed report should serve as a wake-up call for African leaders. The continent cannot continue to lose billions of dollars in resources to smuggling networks while its people suffer. African governments must take decisive action to curb the illicit gold trade, strengthen regulatory frameworks, and hold those involved accountable. At the same time, African nations must demand greater accountability from international partners, including the UAE and Western nations. The global community must be held responsible for its role in perpetuating the illicit trade. This includes closing legal loopholes, improving transparency in the gold trade, and providing support for African countries to develop their own regulatory capacities. African nations must also explore ways to add value to their gold production. Instead of exporting raw gold, countries should invest in refining and manufacturing industries that can create jobs and generate additional revenue. By retaining more of the value chain within the continent, Africa can begin to break free from its dependence on raw material exports and build a more sustainable and diversified economy. The Swissed report reveals the dark underbelly of the global gold trade, where Africa's wealth is siphoned away through illicit channels, enriching foreign powers while impoverishing the continent. The UAE, Switzerland, and other beneficiaries of this trade must be held accountable for their role in exploiting Africa's resources. At the same time, African leaders must take responsibility for protecting their nation's wealth and ensuring that it benefits their people. This issue is not just about economics, it is about justice. The exploitation of Africa's resources by foreign powers is a form of neo-colonialism that perpetuates inequality and undermines the continent's sovereignty. It is time for Africa to reclaim its wealth and use it to build a better future for its people. The fight against gold smuggling is not just a fight for economic justice. It is a fight for the soul of the continent. If you found this analysis eye-opening, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Stay informed and join us in the fight for a fair and just world.